Close your eyes and imagine walking through a forest, where time moves differently. The air is cool and damp, and beneath the canopy, something ancient stirs in the gentle breeze. These are the ferns, and they have stories older than almost anything else you know. Long before flowers ever painted the world with color, ferns were here. They emerged over 360 million years ago in a period we call the Devonian. To put this in perspective, ferns existed long before the dinosaurs walked the earth. They witnessed the rise and fall of countless species, weathering mass extinctions that claimed so many others. While the world transformed around them, ferns quietly endured, adapting, surviving, simply being. Today, there are approximately 10,500 species of ferns growing across our planet. From the smallest delicate fronds you might miss if you weren't looking carefully, to massive tree ferns that tower overhead like something from a dream. Each one is part of an unbroken lineage stretching back through the millennia. If you were to examine a fern closely, and you should sometime when you're awake, you'd notice something curious. Unlike the flowering plants that dominate our gardens and fields, ferns reproduce through spores rather than seeds. Turn over a fern frond, that graceful leaf-like structure, and you might see small brown dots or patches on the underside. These are called sori, clusters of sporangia where millions of microscopic spores develop. When conditions are just right, these sporangia split open with a tiny snap, flinging spores into the air to drift on currents of wind, seeking new places to begin again. But the spore is only the beginning of the fern story. What happens next is something remarkable, something that happens largely unseen in the quiet places of the forest floor. When a spore lands in a suitable spot, somewhere moist and shaded, it doesn't grow directly into the fern you recognize. Instead, it becomes something else entirely. A tiny, heart-shaped organism called a prothallus, usually no bigger than a fingernail. This little green heart is independent, photosynthesizing on its own, and it's here that something magical occurs. The prothallus produces both male and female reproductive structures, and in the presence of water, a film of morning dew or the mist after rain, the male cells actually swim to reach the female cells. Yes, swim. This process is called the alternation of generations, where the fern cycles between two distinct forms, the familiar leafy sporophyte and the tiny gametophyte prothallus. It's an ancient dance, this need for water, a reminder of ferns' origins in Earth's prehistoric wetlands. Speaking of those ancient times, during the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, ferns didn't just exist, they dominated. Imagine vast forests of tree ferns and their relatives, some growing up to 30 meters tall, forming dense swamps that covered much of the land. These weren't exactly like modern ferns, but they were close relatives in the plant kingdom's great family tree. When these enormous plants died, they fell into the swampy waters where they didn't fully decay. Instead, over millions of years, buried under layers of sediment and subjected to tremendous heat and pressure, they transformed into something we rely on even today: coal. The coal we've burned to power our civilization is, in essence, fossilized fern forests' ancient sunlight, captured and stored, waiting through the ages. Ferns belong to a group of plants called pteridophytes, and they're considered vascular plants, meaning they have specialized tissues for transporting water and nutrients throughout their structure. This might not sound extraordinary until you consider what it meant for life on Earth. Before vascular plants evolved these internal plumbing systems, plants were limited to staying small and close to water sources. But with vessels to move water from roots to leaves, plants could grow taller, reach for the sun, and colonize new territories. Ferns were among the pioneers of this innovation, part of the first wave of plants to truly claim the land. The frond, that elegant, often feathery structure you think of when you picture a fern, unfurls in a particularly beautiful way. If you've ever noticed a young fern emerging in spring, you might have seen it curled in a tight spiral, a shape often called a fiddlehead because it resembles the scroll at the head of a violin. This coiled structure has a proper scientific name too: a crozier. As the fern grows, the crozier slowly unfurls, revealing the intricate pattern of the mature frond bit by bit, like a secret being whispered into existence. Some fiddleheads are even edible, a delicacy in certain cuisines, though you must be careful, as only certain species are safe to eat, and they must be properly prepared. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine those ancient fern forests, the quiet unfurling of 1,000 fronds, the patient cycle of spore and prothallus, of water and time. The ferns ask nothing of you. They simply grow as they have for hundreds of millions of years, in the cool shadows, breathing quietly, waiting. And so our journey with the ferns continues. In the stillness of your rest, let us wander further into the world of ferns, to the places where they make their homes and the quiet ways they've learned to live. Ferns are found on every continent except Antarctica. From tropical rainforests to temperate woodlands, from rocky cliff faces to the forest floor, they've discovered how to thrive in nearly every corner of the earth where plants can grow. But if you were to search for where ferns are happiest, where they grow most abundantly and diversely, you would find yourself in the tropics. The warm, humid environments of tropical and subtropical regions host the greatest variety of fern species, places where moisture hangs in the air like a gentle embrace and sunlight filters through layers of green. Many ferns are what we call epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants without harming them. In the rainforest canopy, far above the forest floor, ferns make their homes on the branches and trunks of trees, their roots clinging to bark, absorbing moisture from the humid air and rain. They're not parasites. They don't take nutrients from their host trees. They simply need a place to be, high up where they can catch filtered light and drink from the mists that drift through the canopy. Imagine them there, suspended between earth and sky, living their entire lives without ever touching the ground. The word fern itself comes from the Old English fern, but these plants have been known by countless names across cultures and languages throughout human history. In some traditions, ferns were believed to have magical properties. In European folklore, it was said that ferns bloomed only once a year, at midnight on Midsummer's Eve, and whoever found the fern flower, which, as we know, doesn't actually exist since ferns don't flower, would gain invisibility or the ability to understand the language of animals. It's a beautiful myth, born perhaps from the mysterious nature of fern reproduction, which happened in ways our ancestors couldn't quite see or understand. Let's talk about the structure of a fern for a moment, in the way you might examine something precious in your hands. What we typically call a fern frond is technically a leaf, but it's often so elaborately divided that it deserves special terminology. Many fern fronds are compound, meaning they're divided into smaller segments. The main stalk of the frond is called the stipe, and it continues through the leaf blade as the rachis. The individual leaflets branching off the rachis are called pinnae, and if those pinnae are further divided, the smaller segments are called pinnules. This intricate architecture creates those delicate, feathery patterns that make ferns so recognizable and so beautiful. Fractal-like designs where similar patterns repeat at different scales, each level of division echoing the whole. Some ferns have adapted to survive in surprisingly harsh conditions. The resurrection fern, which grows commonly in the southeastern United States, has a remarkable ability. During periods of drought, this fern can lose up to 95% of its moisture content. Its fronds curl up, turn brown, and appear completely dead. But it's not dead, merely waiting. When rain finally comes, the resurrection fern can rehydrate and return to its green, photosynthesizing state within just a few hours. It can repeat this process of desiccation and revival many times throughout its life, earning its evocative name by seemingly rising from the dead again and again. While most ferns prefer shade and moisture, not all of them do. The bracken fern is perhaps the most widely distributed fern species in the world, found across temperate and tropical regions on every continent except Antarctica. Unlike many of its relatives that require the deep shade of forests, Bracken is remarkably adaptable and can grow in open areas, fields, and even disturbed habitats. It spreads through underground rhizomes, horizontal stems that creep through the soil, allowing it to colonize large areas. In some places, bracken is considered invasive because of how successfully it spreads, though it has also been used by humans for centuries as animal bedding, thatch, and even as a food source in some cultures, despite containing compounds that can be toxic if not properly prepared. Ferns don't have flowers, as we've established, but they do have their own kind of beauty and variation. The diversity of fern forms is astonishing. The maidenhair fern has delicate, fan-shaped pinnae on thin, dark stems that seem almost too fragile to exist. The bird's nest fern grows in a rosette of simple, undivided fronds that form a nest-like shape, quite unlike the typical feathery fern. The staghorn fern has fronds that resemble the antlers of a stag, and it grows as an epiphyte with two types of fronds, some sterile ones that form a shield against the tree, and fertile ones that extend outward and bear spores. Each species has found its own way to be in the world, its own solution to the challenges of growth and reproduction. There's something called the fiddlehead that we mentioned before, but it's worth spending another moment with this image. That tightly coiled young frond, spiraling in on itself, protected and patient, contains all the potential of the fully unfurled leaf. As it grows, it uncoils in a process called circinate vernation, the gradual unrolling from the tip downward. You can almost feel it, can't you? That slow, inevitable unfurling, revealing what was always there, just waiting for the right moment. It's a gentle kind of patience, the patience of ferns, the patience of things that have learned to wait through millions of years. In your mind's eye, picture a forest floor dappled with light. The ferns grow there in the shadows, their fronds moving almost imperceptibly in the faintest breeze. They ask for so little, just moisture, just a little light, just time. And they give back quietly, oxygen, beauty, habitat for small creatures, a sense of ancient continuity. They remind us that not everything must rush, that some things simply persist elegantly, softly, through the long turning of seasons. Rest now as the ferns rest, in the peaceful certainty of their existence. Breathe slowly, and let us consider the fern not as a solitary being, but as a home, a refuge, a small world unto itself. In the intricate architecture of a fern's fronds, an entire community thrives. Small insects make their homes among the pinnae, seeking shelter from predators and weather. Spiders spin their delicate webs between the divisions of the leaves, catching tiny prey in the filtered light. In tropical regions, some tree ferns grow so large, reaching heights of up to 20 meters tall, as high as a 6-story building, that their trunks become ecosystems in themselves, hosting mosses, lichens, and even smaller ferns in the crevices of their fibrous bark. These tree ferns aren't truly trees in the botanical sense. They lack the woody tissue that defines true trees. Instead, their trunks are formed from a dense mass of roots and fibrous material, a structure that has supported them for millions of years. One of the most fascinating partnerships in nature involves ferns and a type of bacteria called cyanobacteria. Some aquatic ferns, like azala, which floats on the surface of ponds and slow-moving streams, have formed a symbiotic relationship with cyanobacteria that live in cavities within their leaves. These bacteria have a remarkable ability. They can take nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form that plants can use, a process called nitrogen fixation. In exchange for this vital nutrient, the fern provides the bacteria with sugars produced through photosynthesis and a protected place to live. This partnership is so efficient that azala has been used for centuries in rice paddies across Asia as a natural fertilizer, enriching the water with nitrogen that helps the rice grow. It's a quiet cooperation, this exchange between fern and bacteria, invisible but essential. Ferns have a different kind of root system than many plants. Their roots are adventitious, meaning they arise from the stem rather than developing from the primary root of a seedling, as ferns don't have seedlings in the traditional sense. These roots spread through soil or cling to bark, seeking water and nutrients, but they also serve another purpose, anchoring the fern in place. Some ferns have evolved specialized roots for specific purposes. The roots of epiphytic ferns, for instance, are adapted to absorb moisture from the air and from rain that runs down tree trunks, while the roots of terrestrial ferns dig deep into forest soil, threading through the organic matter of fallen leaves and decaying wood. There's a group of ferns called aquatic ferns that have adapted to live partially or entirely in water. The water clover, despite its name, is actually a fern with leaves that float on the water's surface, looking remarkably like a four-leaf clover. Salvinia is another aquatic fern that forms dense mats on the surface of ponds and lakes, its tiny leaves covered with special water-repellent hairs that keep them afloat. These adaptations show the remarkable flexibility of ferns, their ability to find a way to live even in environments that seem inhospitable to plants we typically associate with dry land. In some cultures, ferns have been used medicinally for thousands of years. The male fern, Dryopteris filixmas, was historically used as a treatment for tapeworms, though modern medicine has found safer alternatives. Various indigenous peoples around the world have used different fern species to treat ailments ranging from wounds to respiratory problems. Of course, it's important to note that many ferns contain compounds that can be toxic, and they should never be consumed or used medicinally without proper knowledge and preparation. But this historical use speaks to humanity's long relationship with these plants. Our recognition that they contain chemical complexities we're still working to understand. The lifespan of a fern can vary dramatically depending on the species and growing conditions. Some small ferns might live only a few years, while tree ferns can live for decades or even over a century, growing slowly and steadily, adding new fronds each year while the old ones die back. There's something peaceful about this pace, isn't there? The unhurried growth, the patience to take 100 years to reach full size. In a world that often demands speed and immediate results, ferns remind us that some things cannot be rushed, that slow growth can be strong growth, that time itself is not an enemy but simply time. Ferns reproduce not just through spores but also vegetatively, meaning they can create new plants from parts of themselves. Many ferns produce small plantlets along their fronds or rhizomes that can break off and grow into independent plants. The mother fern, Asplenium bulbiferum, produces tiny baby ferns right on its fronds, little green copies of the parent that eventually drop off or can be gently removed and planted. It's asexual reproduction, requiring no spores, no prothallus, no swimming cells, just a small piece of the parent becoming, in time, its own individual. Consider for a moment the hardiness of ferns. They survived the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. While massive animals perished and countless species went extinct, ferns persisted. There's even evidence of a fern spike in the fossil record immediately following the extinction event, a brief period where fern spores became extremely abundant, suggesting that ferns were among the first plants to recolonize the devastated landscapes. Their survivors, these ancient plants, adapted not just to specific conditions, but to the very concept of change itself. The Japanese have a tradition called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, the practice of spending time in forests for health and well-being. While this practice encompasses all forest plants, ferns are an integral part of these healing landscapes. Their presence in the understory, their lush green fronds, their association with moisture and shade, all of this contributes to the peaceful atmosphere that makes forests such restorative places. Even if you've never heard the term, perhaps you've felt it. That sense of calm that descends when you're surrounded by green growing things, by ferns unfurling in the dappled light, by the quiet, patient life of the forest floor. Let the image of those ferns settle into your mind, green and ancient, patient and persistent, growing slowly in the quiet places. In the gentle darkness behind your closed eyes, let us turn our attention to the way ferns communicate with their world. not through words or sounds, but through chemistry, through light, through the silent language of survival. Like all green plants, ferns perform photosynthesis, that miraculous process of turning sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into sugars and oxygen. But ferns have adapted to photosynthesize efficiently in low-light conditions, making them perfectly suited for life on the forest floor, where only about 1–2% of the sunlight that hits the canopy actually reaches the ground. Their fronds are often positioned horizontally to capture as much of that precious filtered light as possible, and their cells contain high concentrations of chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures light energy. It's a quiet efficiency, this ability to make the most of limited resources, to thrive in the shadows where others might struggle. Some ferns are deciduous, meaning they lose their fronds seasonally, while others are evergreen, maintaining their foliage year-round. In temperate regions, many ferns die back in winter, their fronds browning and withering, but their rhizomes remain alive beneath the soil, waiting for spring. When warmth returns, they send up new fiddleheads that unfurl into fresh fronds, a yearly cycle of death and renewal. Evergreen ferns, on the other hand, maintain their fronds through winter, often looking somewhat battered by spring, but still carrying on the work of photosynthesis even on warm winter days. Each strategy has its advantages. Deciduous ferns conserve energy during harsh seasons, while evergreen ferns can photosynthesize whenever conditions allow. There's a remarkable fern called the walking fern, and it has earned its name through a curious habit. The tips of its long, tapering fronds arch down and touch the soil, and where they make contact, they can form roots and grow into a new plant. The frond essentially walks the fern to a new location, one slow step at a time, though a step that might take a full season or more to complete. It's found primarily on limestone rocks and cliff faces in eastern North America, and if you were to observe a colony of walking ferns, you'd see them scattered across the rock surface, connected by the arching fronds of their predecessors, a family tree written in green across stone. Ferns have evolved various mechanisms to protect themselves from being eaten. While they lack the flowers, fruits, and scents that some plants use to attract or deter animals, many ferns produce chemical compounds that make them unpalatable or even toxic to herbivores. Some contain compounds called tannins that give them a bitter taste and can interfere with an animal's digestion. Others produce carcinogens or thiaminase, an enzyme that breaks down thiamine, vitamin B1, which can sicken animals that eat too much of them. The bracken fern we mentioned earlier contains several such compounds, which is one reason it's able to grow so successfully. Few animals browse it heavily. These chemical defenses are invisible, silent guardians that have helped ferns persist through eons of hungry herbivores. In New Zealand, the silver fern holds a special cultural significance. The underside of its fronds are covered with silvery white scales that reflect light, and Maori travelers traditionally used these fronds as trail markers, placing them silver side up to mark paths through the forest that could be followed even in moonlight. The silver fern has become a national symbol of New Zealand, appearing on everything from sports uniforms to currency, representing strength, resistance, and the connection between people and the natural world. It's called panga in Maori, and the unfurling koru spiral of its fiddlehead is a powerful symbol representing new life, growth, and harmony. Ferns have a fascinating relationship with light that goes beyond photosynthesis. Some ferns exhibit phototropism, the ability to grow toward light sources, while others show negative phototropism in certain structures growing away from light. But there's also something called nyctinasty in some fern species, a response to the cycle of day and night. Certain ferns will fold their fronds or change position in response to darkness, though this movement is much subtler than the dramatic leaf movements you might see in plants like the mimosa or prayer plant. It's a gentle responsiveness, an acknowledgement of the rhythm of day and night, of light and darkness. The hart's tongue fern is unusual among ferns for having simple, undivided fronds rather than the compound, divided fronds typical of most species. Its fronds are long, strap-like and glossy green, with a pronounced midrib running down the center. They look almost too simple to be ferns, more like some other kind of plant entirely. Yet there on the underside are the characteristic sori arranged in neat rows. This fern prefers limestone areas and can be found growing from cracks in old walls, rocky slopes, and shaded ravines. Its common name comes from the resemblance of its fronds to a deer's tongue, another example of how humans have always sought to understand the natural world by finding familiar shapes within it. Ferns play an important ecological role in nutrient cycling. When their fronds die back, they decompose relatively quickly compared to the leaves of many trees, returning nutrients to the soil. Their decaying matter becomes food for fungi, bacteria, and countless soil organisms, which break it down further, releasing nitrogen, phosphorus, and other essential elements back into the ecosystem. In this way, ferns are not just passive inhabitants of the forest but active participants in the great cycle of growth, death, and renewal that sustains all life. They take from the soil and air, transform those elements through the alchemy of photosynthesis, and eventually return them, enriched, to the earth. Some ferns have developed relationships with ants. Certain tropical ferns provide shelter for ant colonies in specialized structures, and in return, the ants protect the fern from herbivores and may even provide nutrients through their waste. It's another example of the interconnectedness of life, the way species evolve together, finding mutual benefit in cooperation. The fern offers a home, the ants offer protection, and both thrive better than either would alone. These relationships, called mutualisms, remind us that survival is often not about competition, but about finding ways to support and be supported by others. Pause. Imagine yourself now like a fern on the forest floor, perfectly positioned to receive what you need, protected by subtle strengths, connected to everything around you through invisible networks of exchange. Simply being, simply growing, simply present. Let your breathing slow even further now, as we explore the ways that ferns hold memory. Not in their minds, for they have none, but in their very structure, in the layers of rock where their ancestors rest, in the patterns written into their cells. The fossil record of ferns is remarkably rich. Because spores are produced in such vast quantities, and their outer walls are incredibly resistant to decay, they preserve well in sedimentary rocks. Paleobotanists, scientists who study ancient plants, can examine fossil spores under microscopes and identify which fern species lived millions of years ago, what the climate might have been like, and how plant communities have changed over time. Some fossilized ferns are so perfectly preserved that you can see the delicate structure of their fronds, the arrangement of their sori, even the individual cells, frozen in stone like photographs from an unimaginably distant past. These fossils tell us that some modern fern genera have existed largely unchanged for over 180 million years. Living fossils, in a sense, forms so successful that evolution saw little need to alter them. Ferns are often pioneer species, among the first plants to colonize disturbed or newly formed habitats. After a volcanic eruption, after a landslide, after a fire has cleared a forest, ferns are frequently among the first to return. Their spores are light and easily dispersed by wind, allowing them to reach bare ground quickly. Once established, their growth helps stabilize soil, preventing erosion, and their decaying fronds add organic matter that enriches the substrate, preparing it for other plants to follow. In Hawaii, after lava flows cool and harden into barren rock, ferns are often the very first visible plants to appear, their spores finding purchase in tiny cracks and crevices, beginning the long process of transforming stone into living soil. They are colonizers, but gentle ones, making way for the communities that will follow. The diversity of fern habitats is truly extraordinary. While we often picture ferns in moist, shaded forests, some species have adapted to deserts, growing in rock crevices where they can access underground moisture. The lip fern and cloak fern are examples of desert-adapted ferns found in arid regions of North and South America. Their fronds small and often covered with scales or hairs that help reduce water loss. During the driest times, these ferns may curl up and go dormant, waiting months or even years for rain, demonstrating the same resurrection strategy we saw earlier, but in an even more extreme form. Life finds a way, even in the most unlikely places, and ferns have proven themselves masters of adaptation. In traditional Japanese gardens, ferns are valued not for bright colors or showy displays, but for their subtle textures and shades of green. They're planted in the shadiest corners, near water features, among moss-covered stones, creating a sense of age and tranquility. The Japanese aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence, is perfectly embodied by ferns, with their delicate fronds that emerge, mature, and eventually fade, their quiet presence that never demands attention but always rewards it. In these gardens, ferns are not merely plants but elements of contemplation, invitations to slow down and observe the subtle beauty of the natural world. Certain ferns have become important organisms for scientific research. The model fern Ceratopteris, often called the sea fern, is used in laboratories around the world to study plant development, genetics, and reproduction. It has a short life cycle, is easy to grow, and completes its alternation of generations quickly, making it ideal for experiments. Through studying sea fern, scientists have learned about fundamental processes in plant biology that apply not just to ferns but to all plants. Insights that help us understand how plants grow, how they respond to their environment, and how they've evolved. This humble fern, then, is a teacher, helping us unlock secrets of the green world. Ferns exhibit remarkable chromosome variation. While humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, ferns can have widely varying numbers, and many ferns are polyploid, meaning they have multiple complete sets of chromosomes. Some ferns have been found with over 1,000 chromosomes, though most have far fewer. This polyploidy is thought to contribute to their evolutionary success, providing genetic flexibility that allows them to adapt to new environments and conditions. It's a different strategy than what we see in most animals, a way of storing genetic information that gives ferns options, possibilities, paths forward through the changing landscape of evolutionary time. The cinnamon fern, named for the cinnamon-colored fertile fronds it produces, has a special place in natural history. Its distinctive appearance, with separate fertile fronds that stand upright in the center of the plant, while sterile fronds arch gracefully around them, makes it easily recognizable. But what's particularly interesting is that cinnamon fern fossils have been found that are virtually identical to modern plants, dating back to the age of dinosaurs. For over 75 million years, the cinnamon fern has maintained essentially the same form. Imagine that, a design so successful, so perfectly suited to its ecological role, that it has remained unchanged while continents drifted, climates shifted, and countless other species evolved, thrived, and went extinct around it. Some ferns can accumulate heavy metals from the soil without being harmed, a trait that scientists are studying for potential environmental applications. These hypercumulator ferns can absorb metals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium, storing them in their tissues. The Chinese brake fern, for instance, is remarkably efficient at absorbing arsenic from contaminated soil. Researchers are exploring whether these ferns could be used for phytoremediation, using plants to clean up polluted sites. Plant them in contaminated soil, let them grow, harvest them, and the heavy metals come with them, slowly purifying the earth. It's a slow process, but then, ferns have always understood that some things cannot be rushed, that healing takes time. In Victorian England, there was a phenomenon called pteridamania, fern fever. The middle and upper classes became obsessed with collecting ferns, growing them in their homes and conservatories, pressing them into albums, and decorating everything from furniture to fabric with fern motifs. Fern hunting expeditions became popular social activities, and some rare species were collected nearly to extinction. This craze reflected both the Victorian fascination with natural history and the appeal of ferns themselves. Their intricate forms, their exotic varieties, their association with wild, romantic landscapes. The fever eventually cooled, as such enthusiasms do, but it left behind beautiful illustrations, detailed botanical studies, and a legacy of fern appreciation that continues today. Rest in the knowledge of ferns, ancient and adaptable, persistent through unimaginable spans of time, asking nothing but offering so much. Green memories of a world that was and is and will be. Sink deeper now into rest, as we explore the invisible connections beneath the soil. The networks that link fern to fungus, plant to plant, life to life in ways we're only beginning to understand. Beneath the forest floor, fern roots participate in vast underground networks facilitated by mycorrhizal fungi. These microscopic fungi form intimate associations with plant roots, extending thread-like filaments called hyphae through the soil far beyond where roots alone could reach. The fungi help the fern absorb water and nutrients, particularly phosphorus, which is often limited in soil. In exchange, the fern provides the fungus with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It's an ancient partnership. Fossil evidence suggests that these mycorrhizal relationships may have been essential for the first plants to successfully colonize land over 400 million years ago. Ferns didn't conquer the earth alone. They did it in collaboration with fungi, in a partnership that continues to this day, invisible but vital, beneath every step we take in the forest. The royal fern, Osmunda regalis, is sometimes called the flowering fern, though this is a misnomer. It produces no flowers. The name comes from the distinctive appearance of its fertile fronds, which bear clusters of sporangia at their tips that can look, from a distance, somewhat like flower clusters. They turn a rich golden brown when mature, creating a crown-like appearance at the top of the plant, hence, royal. These ferns can grow quite large, up to 2 meters tall in ideal conditions, and they prefer the edges of wetlands, stream banks, and boggy areas. The fibrous roots of royal ferns, called Osmunda fiber, were once harvested extensively for use as a growing medium for orchids because of their excellent water retention and aeration properties. Even in this, ferns serve, supporting the growth of other plants. Ferns have a unique relationship with time that goes beyond their ancient lineage. Some fern spores can remain viable, capable of germinating, for decades, or even longer when stored in the right conditions. Scientists have successfully germinated fern spores that were over 100 years old, collected by Victorian botanists and preserved in herbarium collections. The spores simply wait, their tough outer walls protecting the genetic material inside, patient beyond human comprehension. When conditions are finally right, moisture, the correct temperature, appropriate light, they germinate as if no time had passed at all, as if a century was merely a brief pause in their long story. In some tropical regions, ferns have evolved to be epiphyls, plants that grow on the leaves of other plants. These tiny ferns establish themselves on the broad, long-lived leaves of rainforest trees, creating miniature gardens on what is, to them, vast green landscapes. The leaves they colonize can live for many years in the stable conditions of the rainforest, providing a relatively permanent substrate. The ferns must be small and light enough not to burden their host, and they must be adapted to the exposed conditions on a leaf surface. More light than the forest floor, but also more desiccation. It's an extreme specialization, life finding a foothold in yet another unexpected place. The interrupted fern gets its charming name from the appearance of its fertile fronds. While most of the frond looks like a typical fern frond with regular pinnae, the middle section is interrupted by several pairs of fertile pinnae that bear sporangia. These fertile pinnae are quite different in appearance from the sterile ones, smaller, contracted, and covered with sporangia that turn dark brown at maturity. After releasing their spores, these fertile pinnae wither away, leaving a gap in the middle of the frond, a literal interruption in its structure. It's found in woodlands and swamps throughout eastern North America, and once you've seen it, you'll always recognize it by this distinctive interrupted pattern. Ferns have different strategies for dealing with drought beyond just going dormant. Some ferns have evolved succulent-like tissues that store water, allowing them to survive dry periods. Others have developed thick, waxy cuticles on their fronds that reduce water loss through evaporation. Still others have fronds covered in scales or hairs that trap a layer of humid air close to the leaf surface, creating a more favorable microclimate. The resurrection ferns we discussed earlier go fully dormant, but these other ferns try to maintain active life even during challenging conditions. Each strategy represents a different answer to the same fundamental question: how do you survive when water is scarce? In China, certain ferns have been used in traditional medicine for thousands of years. The genus Drinaria, known as Gusuibu, has been used to treat bone fractures and promote healing. Modern research has investigated some of these traditional uses, finding that extracts from some fern species do indeed contain compounds with potential medicinal properties, including anti-inflammatory and bone-strengthening effects. As with all traditional remedies, not all uses have been validated by modern science, and many ferns contain compounds that are toxic. But the long history of human use speaks to our enduring relationship with these plants, our recognition that they contain chemical complexity that might be of value if we can learn to understand and use it safely. Ferns demonstrate what botanists call indeterminate growth in their rhizomes. Unlike plants that grow to a certain size and stop, or that have a defined lifespan, many ferns can theoretically continue growing indefinitely as long as conditions permit. The rhizome extends, produces new fronds, and sections of the rhizome may die back, but the plant as a whole can persist and expand for many years, potentially becoming quite large. A single fern might spread to cover several square meters, and if you were to trace back through its rhizome, you might find that what appears to be many separate plants is actually one individual, one organism that has been slowly growing and spreading for decades. The Boston fern, one of the most popular houseplants in the world, is actually a cultivated variety of the sword fern native to tropical regions. It became particularly popular in Victorian times and has remained beloved ever since, adorning homes in hanging baskets with its gracefully arching fronds. What makes it such a successful houseplant is its tolerance for indoor conditions and its air-purifying qualities. Like many plants, it removes certain toxins from the air, including formaldehyde. But perhaps its real appeal is simpler. It brings a touch of the forest indoors, a piece of that ancient green world, softening our constructed spaces with its gentle presence, reminding us of the natural world even when we're far from forests and streams. Feel yourself connected now to these networks, visible and invisible, ancient partnerships and patient growth. The slow, steady pulse of life that continues beneath the surface, always growing, always reaching, always becoming. Let your mind drift gently now as we contemplate the extraordinary shapes ferns have taken, the architectural variations that have emerged over millions of years, each one a solution, each one beautiful in its own particular way. The staghorn fern, which we touched upon earlier, deserves a longer moment of contemplation. This remarkable plant produces two distinctly different types of fronds: basal fronds that are rounded and shield-like, which turn brown as they age and form a protective basket that collects falling debris and provides nutrients for the plant, and fertile fronds that branch out like antlers, growing up to a meter long in some species. These ferns are epiphytic and native to tropical regions of Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia. In their natural habitat, they grow on tree trunks high in the canopy, and their unique form allows them to capture water and organic matter while presenting a large surface area for spore production. People who grow them as houseplants often mount them on boards, mimicking their natural tree-dwelling habit, and the plants can live for many decades, their basal fronds forming thick, layered shields that become homes for insects and tiny creatures. Some ferns are climbing plants, using other vegetation for support as they reach toward the light. The climbing ferns of the genus Lygodium have fronds that can grow to incredible lengths, up to 30 meters or more in some species. Unlike most ferns whose fronds have determinate growth and stop at a certain length, climbing fern fronds continue growing indefinitely from their tips, twining around other plants for support. Their fronds are actually more like vines, and they use this strategy to reach the canopy in tropical and subtropical forests. In some regions where they've been introduced, particularly in Florida, they've become invasive, smothering native vegetation with their aggressive growth. A reminder that plants we might admire for their unique adaptations can become problematic when removed from their native ecosystems and the natural checks and balances that evolved alongside them. The bird's nest fern, Asplenium nidus, takes its name from the rosette shape formed by its fronds, which creates a central nest-like structure. In nature, this nest collects falling leaves, twigs, and organic debris from the canopy above. As this material decomposes, it provides nutrients directly to the plant. The fern essentially creates its own compost pile in the center of its body. Water collects there too, and the combination of moisture and decaying organic matter creates a rich growing medium. Small animals, including frogs and insects, sometimes make their homes in these natural reservoirs, adding their own waste products to the nutrient cycle. The bird's nest fern has simple, undivided fronds that can grow quite large, up to 1.5 meters long in ideal conditions, giving it a dramatically different appearance from the delicate, divided fronds we typically associate with ferns. Within fern fronds, the arrangement of veins follows patterns that have fascinated botanists and mathematicians alike. Some ferns have simple, parallel veins running from the midrib to the frond margin. Others have netted venation, where veins branch and reconnect to form intricate networks. Still others show a pattern called dichotomous venation, where veins repeatedly fork into two equal branches, creating a fractal-like pattern. These vein patterns aren't just aesthetically pleasing. They're functional, distributing water and nutrients throughout the frond while also providing structural support. The study of these patterns has even contributed to our understanding of natural networks and efficient distribution systems. The mosquito fern, another name for azalea, is one of the smallest ferns in existence, with individual plants measuring just a few millimeters across. Yet despite their tiny size, these floating aquatic ferns can reproduce so quickly that they can cover the surface of a pond in a remarkably short time, creating a dense green carpet. Their rapid growth, combined with their nitrogen-fixing partnership with cyanobacteria, means they can quickly colonize nutrient-poor waters. Historically, they've been intentionally cultivated in rice paddies, but in some regions where they've been introduced, they've become problematic, clogging waterways and blocking light from reaching underwater plants. Size, in the plant kingdom, is no measure of impact. These tiny ferns can transform entire aquatic ecosystems. Some ferns produce what are called dimorphic fronds, having two distinct frond forms on the same plant, as we've seen with several species. But the degree of difference can be quite striking. The sensitive fern, Onoclea sensibilis, produces broad, deeply lobed sterile fronds throughout the growing season, but its fertile fronds look nothing like them. The fertile fronds are narrow, upright, and covered with bead-like structures that contain the sporangia. These fertile fronds persist through winter after the sterile fronds have died back, standing like dark sentinels above the snow, releasing their spores when conditions are favorable. The common name, sensitive, refers to the sterile frond's sensitivity to frost. They're among the first ferns to wither when cold weather arrives. The concept of fern allies is important to understand. There are plants that are closely related to ferns but different enough to be classified separately. These include horsetails, club mosses, and quillworts. Together with true ferns, they form a group called pteridophytes, vascular plants that reproduce via spores rather than seeds. Horsetails, in particular, were much more diverse and dominant in ancient forests than they are today. During the Carboniferous period, tree-sized horsetails grew alongside the fern-like plants we discussed earlier, forming vast swamps. Today, only one genus of horsetails survives, Equisetum, but these living remnants still possess the distinctive jointed stems and whorled branches that characterized their ancient relatives. They're not technically ferns, but they're part of the same ancient lineage, fellow travelers through deep time. Ferns exhibit a phenomenon called apogamy in some species, where the sporophyte develops directly from the gametophyte without fertilization occurring. This is a form of asexual reproduction that skips the normal sexual reproduction stage. Conversely, some ferns exhibit apospory, where the gametophyte develops directly from sporophyte tissue without spores. These variations on the normal life cycle show the flexibility of fern reproduction, their ability to adapt their strategies to different circumstances. When conditions favor one method over another, ferns have multiple pathways available, not stuck rigidly to one approach, but able to respond to what the environment demands. The texture of fern fronds varies remarkably across species. Some are delicate and almost translucent, like the filmy ferns whose fronds are only one cell layer thick in places, allowing light to pass through them. Others are thick and leathery, designed to conserve water and withstand harsh conditions. Some are covered in soft hairs, others in scales, and still others are smooth and glossy. Touch is a sense often overlooked when we think about plants, but if you ever have the opportunity to run your fingers gently across different fern fronds, you'll discover a world of tactile variation, rough and smooth, fuzzy and slick, delicate and robust. Each texture tells a story of adaptation, of the particular challenges that fern faced and the solution it evolved. Let the forms drift through your consciousness, antlers and nests, carpets and climbers, each one perfectly itself, each one shaped by time and need and the patient work of evolution, complex and simple at once, varied yet all somehow unmistakably. Fern. Settle more deeply now into the warmth of rest, as we explore the ways ferns have mastered the art of survival, not through aggression or dominance, but through resilience, flexibility, and an almost infinite patience. Some of the most remarkable ferns are those that live in extreme environments. The parsley fern grows at high altitudes in mountainous regions, thriving in rocky scree and cliff faces where few other plants can survive. It tolerates freezing temperatures and intense UV radiation, its small, parsley-like fronds hugging close to the ground to avoid the worst of the wind. These alpine ferns often grow slowly, taking years to reach even modest size, but they can live for decades in these harsh conditions. They remind us that success doesn't always mean growing large or spreading widely. Sometimes it simply means persisting where others cannot, holding on to life in the most inhospitable places. The water spangles, another aquatic fern related to Azalea, floats freely on water surfaces in tropical and subtropical regions. Its leaves are covered with tiny hairs that trap air, making them water repellent and helping the plant stay afloat. When water levels drop or conditions become unfavorable, these ferns can produce specialized spore-containing structures called sporocarps that sink to the bottom and can survive dry periods or even pass through the digestive systems of birds, allowing the fern to disperse to new water bodies. It's yet another survival strategy, another way ferns have learned to weather uncertainty and spread across the landscape. In temperate forests, the autumn fern displays a particularly beautiful adaptation to seasonal change. Despite its common name, it's actually an evergreen fern that shows its most vibrant colors in spring, when new fronds emerge with coppery red or bronze tones before gradually turning green as they mature. This coloration is due to anthocyanin pigments that protect the young fronds from excess light and cold stress as they develop. As the season progresses and the fronds toughen, the green of chlorophyll dominates. It's a reminder that green is not the only color in the fern palette, that these plants can paint with reds and bronzes and golds, adding warmth to the cool shadows of the forest. Ferns have colonized nearly every type of wetland habitat. The marsh fern, as its name suggests, thrives in marshes, wet meadows, and along stream banks where the soil is consistently moist or even waterlogged. Its roots can tolerate the low oxygen conditions of saturated soils that would suffocate many other plants. The royal fern we discussed earlier also prefers these wet environments. These wetland ferns play important ecological roles, stabilizing wet soils with their root systems, providing habitat for amphibians and invertebrates, and contributing to the complex food webs of these productive ecosystems. In a world where wetlands are increasingly threatened, these ferns are part of what makes these habitats function, part of what we stand to lose. Some ferns have evolved remarkable spore dispersal mechanisms beyond simple wind dispersal. While most ferns rely on air currents to carry their lightweight spores, some species have sporangia that actively catapult spores away from the parent plant. The sporangium has a specialized ring of cells called an annulus that, as it dries, creates tension. When this tension is released, the sporangium snaps open with surprising force, flinging spores into the air. This mechanism, called annulus dehiscence, can launch spores several centimeters away, a significant distance for a microscopic spore, and enough to help ensure they don't just fall directly beneath the parent plant, where they might struggle to establish an already occupied space. The lady fern, Atherium filix femina, is one of the most widespread ferns in the northern hemisphere, found across Europe, Asia, and North America. It's remarkably variable in form, with dozens of named varieties that show different frond shapes, sizes, and growth habits. This variability has made it popular in cultivation, with gardeners selecting and propagating particularly attractive forms. But this variability is also interesting from an evolutionary perspective. It suggests a species that's highly adaptable, able to respond to different environmental conditions with different physical forms. The lady fern can grow in full shade or partial sun, in wet soils or moderately dry ones, at sea level or at considerable altitude. It's a generalist, and that flexibility has made it successful across a vast geographic range. Ferns respond to their environment in ways that aren't always immediately visible. Research has shown that some ferns can adjust the orientation and angle of their fronds in response to light conditions, maximizing photosynthesis in low light or avoiding photo damage in bright light. They can also respond to water availability by adjusting the opening of stomata, tiny pores on the frond surface that allow gas exchange but also permit water loss. When water is scarce, stomata close to conserve moisture. When water is abundant, they open to allow maximum photosynthesis. These responses happen continuously, the fern constantly adjusting to its environment, maintaining the delicate balance between gaining resources and conserving them. In New Zealand's ancient forests, the mamaku or black tree fern can grow up to 20 meters tall, creating its own microhabitat beneath its crown of fronds. The trunk is covered with black, fibrous roots, giving it a distinctive dark appearance. Maori traditionally used the starchy pith from the trunk as food, and the trunk itself was used for building materials. Young fronds, koro, are also edible and hold deep cultural significance. This fern, like many tree ferns, takes decades to reach its full height, but once established, it can live for over a century, a living connection to the ancient forests that once covered much of New Zealand before human settlement. The concept of fern spore banks in soil is fascinating. Spores that land in soil but don't immediately germinate don't necessarily die. They can remain dormant in the soil for years, even decades, forming a spore bank similar to seed banks in flowering plants. When conditions change, when a tree falls and creates a gap in the canopy, letting in light, or when soil is disturbed, these dormant spores can germinate. Scientists have discovered ancient fern spores germinating in disturbed soils, species that hadn't been seen in an area for many years suddenly reappearing. The soil holds. Memory holds possibility, holds the potential for renewal. Feel the patience of the ferns, waiting in the soil as spores, waiting through seasons, waiting through the years, responding when the moment is right, growing when conditions allow, resting when they must. Survival measured not in dramatic flourishes but in steady, quiet persistence. Let your thoughts become soft and dreamlike now, as we explore the many ways ferns have intertwined with human life. Not as tools or resources primarily, though they've been those too, but as companions in our journey, as reminders of the wild green world that exists alongside our constructed one. Throughout history, ferns have appeared in human art and symbolism. In Celtic and Norse traditions, ferns were considered magical plants, associated with hidden doorways and secret knowledge. The unfurling fiddlehead has been used as a symbol of new beginnings, growth, and the unfolding of potential. You'll find it in everything from ancient carvings to modern logos. In Maori culture, the koru, representing the unfurling fern frond, is one of the most important symbols, representing new life, growth, strength, and peace. It appears in traditional carving, tattoos, and contemporary art, a visual shorthand for the beginning of something new, for potential waiting to be realized. Ferns have been used to make dyes throughout various cultures. The rhizomes and fronds of certain species can produce colors ranging from yellows and greens to browns, depending on the species and the mordants used. While they were never as important for dyeing as some other plants, they were locally significant in places where they grew abundantly. The male fern, in particular, was used to create yellowish and greenish dyes. These traditional uses remind us that humans have always found ways to incorporate the plants around them into daily life, extracting utility and beauty from what the forest offers. In the language of flowers, that Victorian system of assigning meanings to plants, ferns represented sincerity, fascination, and magic. To give someone a fern was to express genuine interest and wonder. Given the Victorian obsession with ferns, this symbolism is fitting. But there's something deeper here too, the recognition that ferns do inspire fascination, that there is something almost magical about their ancient lineage, their delicate beauty, their mysterious reproduction that happens largely out of sight. Some ferns have become important indicator species for environmental health, because many ferns are sensitive to air pollution, particularly sulfur dioxide. Their presence or absence can tell scientists about air quality. Certain ferns are also sensitive to heavy metals in soil, while others accumulate them. By surveying which ferns are present in an area and examining their health, ecologists can assess environmental conditions. The filmy ferns, with their delicate fronds only one cell layer thick in places, are particularly sensitive to changes in humidity and air quality. They act as living monitors, their health reflecting the health of their habitat. The maidenhair fern, with its delicate, fan-shaped leaflets and thin, wire-like black stems, has been beloved in gardens and as a houseplant for centuries. Its botanical name, adiantum, comes from the Greek word meaning unwetted, referring to the way water beads up and rolls off its fronds without wetting them, a property that has fascinated observers for millennia. This water-repellent quality is due to the microscopic structure of the leaf surface. In traditional medicine, maidenhair fern was used to treat various respiratory ailments, and it was an ingredient in a sweet syrup called capillaire. Today, it's primarily appreciated for its beauty, its graceful fronds bringing an air of elegance to shaded gardens and indoor spaces. Fern fossils have been found with insect damage, showing that the relationship between ferns and herbivorous insects goes back hundreds of millions of years. Some of these fossil fronds show distinctive patterns of damage that match the feeding styles of specific insect groups, allowing paleontologists to understand ancient ecological relationships. It's a reminder that ferns have never existed in isolation. They've always been part of complex food webs, always interacting with other organisms, adapting to herbivory, competing for resources, partnering with beneficial organisms. The story of ferns is also the story of everything that has lived alongside them. In Japanese culture, certain ferns are associated with specific seasons and are featured in traditional poetry and seasonal references. The bracken fern's young shoots, warabi, are harvested as a spring delicacy, carefully prepared to remove toxins. The autumn fern and its changing colors are noted in seasonal observations. This attention to the details of plant life, when each species emerges, how it changes through the year, reflects a deep connection to the natural world and the turning of seasons. Ferns mark time, not by measuring it precisely but by embodying it, by being in each season exactly what that season calls them to be. Some contemporary research is exploring whether certain ferns might be useful in biotechnology. The proteins that allow resurrection ferns to survive extreme dehydration, for instance, are being studied to see if they might have applications in preserving biological materials or developing drought-resistant crops. The compounds that allow hyperaccumulator ferns to tolerate heavy metals might inform strategies for dealing with pollution. Even after millions of years, ferns still have things to teach us, solutions to offer, if we're willing to pay attention and learn. The ostrich fern produces some of the most popular edible fiddleheads, harvested in spring in northeastern North America. These tightly coiled young fronds are considered a delicacy, with a flavor somewhere between asparagus and green beans. They must be cooked before eating and consumed in moderation, but for many people in regions where they grow wild, fiddlehead season is a celebrated time of year, a green gift from the forest after the long winter. Native peoples of North America have harvested them for thousands of years, and the tradition continues today. Another thread in the long relationship between humans and ferns, another way these ancient plants sustain us. Imagine the ferns growing quietly in forests you'll never see, in gardens tended by hands unknown to you, in conservatories and homes, wild and cultivated, ancient and ever-present. They ask nothing of us, yet they give. Beauty, oxygen, habitat, food, medicine, inspiration. They simply grow, and in growing, they companion us through this world. As you drift toward the deepest rest, let us complete our journey with the ferns, returning to where we began, to their timelessness, their persistence, their quiet mastery of simply being. In the deepest forests, where old-growth trees tower overhead and the canopy is thick with leaves, the light that reaches the ground is dim and green, filtered through countless layers of vegetation. Here, ferns thrive in what seems like perpetual twilight. These ancient forest ferns often grow slowly, their rhizomes spreading gradually through the rich humus of the forest floor. Some of these fern colonies may be centuries old, the same genetic individual persisting through the rise and fall of the trees around it. When a tree falls, creating a gap in the canopy, the fern may respond with a flush of new growth, taking advantage of the increased light. But even when the gap closes as new trees grow, the fern remains, patient and enduring in the shadows. Ferns play a crucial role in the water cycle of many forests. Their fronds intercept rainfall, slowing its journey to the ground. Water beads on the fronds, runs down to the stipe, and drips gently onto the soil below, reducing erosion and allowing more water to infiltrate the ground rather than running off. The ferns themselves transpire water from their fronds, returning moisture to the air and contributing to the humid microclimate of the forest. In tropical cloud forests, where mist and fog are constant, epiphytic ferns can absorb water directly from the air through their fronds, then release it back through transpiration, participating in the constant cycling of water between earth and atmosphere. Some of the rarest ferns in the world survive in only a few locations, protected by conservation efforts. The Killarney fern, for instance, grows in only a handful of sites in Ireland and a few other locations in Western Europe. It requires very specific conditions: humid, shaded environments near waterfalls or in deep gorges where moisture is constant. As habitats change and climates shift, these specialist ferns are particularly vulnerable. Conservation of ferns isn't just about preserving individual species. It's about maintaining the habitats they require, the complex conditions that allow them to persist. When we protect a rare fern, we're protecting the waterfall, the gorge, the forest, the entire system. The diversity of fern reproduction is even greater than we've discussed. Some ferns can produce gametophytes that are perennial, living for years as tiny prothallai before finally producing a sporophyte. Others can produce sporophytes directly from gametophyte tissue without fertilization needing to occur at all. Some ferns hybridize readily with related species, creating offspring with characteristics of both parents. This reproductive flexibility has contributed to fern diversity and their ability to adapt to changing conditions. They're not locked into one strategy, but can shift approaches depending on what works best in their particular circumstance. In terrariums and bottle gardens, ferns have found a new kind of habitat: miniature ecosystems created and maintained by humans. The high humidity and stable conditions of these enclosed environments suit many ferns perfectly, allowing even delicate species to thrive. People have been growing ferns in Wardian cases, sealed glass containers, since the Victorian era. There's something particularly satisfying about creating these little worlds, about watching ferns unfurl and grow in spaces we've made for them. It's a kind of partnership, a way of bringing the forest into our homes, of tending to these ancient plants and keeping them close. Ferns remind us of the concept of deep time, the vast stretches of geological history that dwarf human experience. When we look at a fern, we're looking at a form that has existed since before flowers, before mammals, before birds, before most of what we think of as the modern world. Yet they're still here, still unfurling new fronds each spring, still reproducing through the same ancient dance of spore and prothallus. They connect us to that deep past, serving as living links to Earth's history. In their persistence, they offer a kind of comfort. Life continues, life adapts, life endures. The study of ferns, pteridology, continues to reveal new species and new insights. Even in well-explored regions, botanists occasionally discover fern species previously unknown to science, hidden in remote locations or overlooked because they resembled other species. DNA analysis has revealed that some ferns we thought were single species are actually complexes of multiple related species. Our understanding of ferns continues to deepen, to become more nuanced, more detailed. There is always more to learn, always another layer of complexity to appreciate. In gardens, ferns provide structure and texture that complement flowering plants. They offer different shades and tones of green, different patterns of growth, different shapes. A garden with ferns has depth and interest even when nothing is in bloom. Garden designers speak of ferns as providing bones to a garden, the underlying structure that makes the space work. But ferns offer more than just structure. They offer a sense of timelessness, a connection to wild places, a feeling of peace and coolness even on hot summer days. As climate change alters habitats worldwide, ferns face both challenges and opportunities. Some ferns may find their suitable habitat shrinking as temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift. Others may be able to expand into new areas. Scientists are studying how different fern species respond to changing conditions, trying to predict which will be vulnerable and which resilient. In some cases, ferns' long evolutionary history and their various reproductive strategies may help them adapt. In others, particularly for specialist species with narrow habitat requirements, the changes may come too quickly. The future of ferns, like the future of all life on Earth, is being written now in the choices we make about how we live on this planet. And so we complete our journey through the world of ferns, from their ancient origins to their present diversity, from their quiet forest homes to the gardens and homes they share with us, from their complex life cycles to their simple, persistent growth. They are survivors and thrivers, specialists and generalists, delicate and tough, unchanging and adaptable. They are simply themselves, ferns, growing green in the world, as they have for hundreds of millions of years, as they will, we hope, for hundreds of millions more. Rest now in the green darkness behind your eyes, in the knowledge of ferns and their patience and their persistence. Let yourself unfurl slowly like a fiddlehead in spring, taking all the time you need, growing toward whatever light you seek, rooted and reaching, grounded and rising, simply being, simply growing, simply at peace. Sleep well among the ferns,